What's going on, guys? All right, some Pontiac action on the dyno tonight. 2009 G8 GT. So this is an L76 6-liter, or at least that's how it started life. And what we got going on here is the owner, this guy brought us this car, Todd, he brought us this car, along with a short block to put in it, because the short block did have a noise in it. This motor did have quite a bit of valve train noise, and there was a little bit of a bottom end knock to it. So we extracted the L76 out of it, and he had a iron block, I think it was an L92 block, with a 4-inch crank, rods, pistons, dish pistons for boost. So we put his ported heads on top of that. We put his BTR stage 3 cam in that short block, put the rec port intake back on it, put his cold air back on, put his headers back on, and here we are now. So I did drive this car around, get the motor broke in first with break-in oil. That's our procedure. We usually go 200-300 miles on a break-in before we put it on the dyno and start thrashing on it. When I break new motors in, I will load the motors. Sometimes we'll do it on the dyno, but the weather's nice right now, and so I was able to drive this thing around. I actually drove it home and back. That's 100 miles right there. I can take country roads and do a bunch of start stops, and so I do load them, but I just don't RPM them very high. I'll limit my RPMs when we're breaking them into 4,500. And not all the time. I'll drive it around normal, do a couple stints here and there of doing that, and do a lot of up and down the RPM. Just so we seat the rings in properly. So got that procedure done. Got some mileage on it. Got it strapped down. So before we get into all that, I'm going to talk about, but there's a couple compromises on it before we get into numbers and look at some final numbers when I get this thing spun up and dialed in, that I'll talk about first. So first thing, we'll start at the induction. This, on a 408 cubic inch motor, they like big tube. I mean, it's a bigger inch motor, so they like big tube intakes, and so this will be a restriction, I guarantee you. This mass airflow sensor, these G8 mass airflow sensors, are the earlier style, like kind of Gen 3.5. I guess this is kind of a Gen 4 car, but it's not a blade style like an LS3, LS9, LSA, where it's just that card, LS7, where it's just that card, that little slot meter that slides in. These are pretty small in the inside of them. I think I want to say the interior one of these is like a 3.5 or 3.25 inch diameter, which is pretty small for a 408. So that's going to be a restriction right there. This car does have 1 7/8 inch headers, which are small for a 408. It's got 2.5 inches. Now it does have nice exhaust. It's got an X pipe and stuff, but it's all 2.5, which is a little small for a 408 for top end power. It's got the stock G8 mufflers, which are good up to a certain point, but they're not a dual mode, like let's say like a 5th or 6th gen Camaro with a dual mode muffler where they just open up and it's just basically a straight through. They're a chambered muffler, and so the exhaust has to take pretty torturous path to get out through the tips. So those are a little bit of a restriction. So with all that being said, I mean, it's not going to make a big 550 wheel number like some of the other 408 combinations you're going to see. The other thing, the big thing with it though too, is the compression ratio. So it does have a dish piston. So his ultimate goal with this was to boost it, was to put boost on top of it. So he did go with a dish piston. We did mill the heads to bring the compression ratio up to about 10-to-1, because it was going to be 9.5, which it doesn't need to be that low because he does have flex fuel on it. He does have big injectors in it, and when he does boost it, he plans on running it on E85. So we did mill the heads 20, got the compression back up to 10-to-1, and but again, normally aspirated, that's not ideal on something like this with a moderately sized cam, moderate to large size cam. I mean, for a 408, it's a moderate cam, but still, we could with E85 we could be 11.5, 12-to-1 with something like this easily to kind of maximize NA power. But because he's going to supercharge it, we don't need the big compression. Actually, the 10-to-1 I think is perfect. I think that's right where you need to be for especially for E85. So yeah, I think it's got that cold air. So the bottom end it's an iron block, crank rods, pistons. It's got the BTR. I think it's a BTR stage 3 LS3 rectangular port style cam, which I think is like a 229, 245, something like that. Don't quote me on that, but it's hard to memorize all the specs on all those different cams. He's got a Mighty Mouse catch can. Does have headers and exhaust. So yeah, motor's running really nice. It's nice and smooth. I've done a couple of preliminary pulls on it just to kind of make sure I need to be where I am. So we're gonna spin this thing up a couple times here on pump gas. It'll probably take me 3-4 pulls to get it dialed in on pump, because I did drive this thing around in the street and I was able to get it pretty dialed. I was able to get the tune pretty far, just obviously street tuning it. That's where I started way back 20 years ago. So when I'm street tuning stuff for a couple hours, I can get them 90% done. I just need to get the wide open throttle where I can data log air fuel and be a little bit more precise with the wide open stuff. That's why we're here, and then we can see a number. I think that probably covers it for now. So yeah, we'll spin this up. Gas is low, it's like an 1/8 tank. So I'll do a couple pulls. We'll probably end up with the gas light on. And then I'm gonna put, I got 10 gallons of E85, well it's probably about E75, so we'll probably end up with about 70% ethanol, which is fine. With something like this, I'll be able to extrapolate that out to like an even out to 80%. So, and we'll see where we end up. So stay tuned. I think that'll do it for this one. So let's take a look at the numbers. So the final on about 70% ethanol is 452. So 439 was the pump gas final. So I left that up there. I left the final run on that just so we could compare. And I brought up just the last 2 runs. Obviously, the one I just did was the 452. I left the previous E80, well, E70, I should say, run up and added a couple degrees of timing. I picked up a decent amount in the mid-range. Out here, not so much, but I think that'll do it. Yeah, it looks like I picked up 6 pound-feet at 2. That's with 2 degrees of timing. So again, I've done this long enough to where I know if I tried for another degree, it'd probably pick up nothing. So 2 degrees, it's only picking up 6. Torque, it's another degree isn't going to do anything. So there's always a diminishing return. Plus these LS motors with the port heads, the rectangular port heads, I've done so many of them, I know where they like to be. So, but yeah, that's not too bad. Again, there's some compromises on this motor, like we talked about before at the beginning of the video. This motor was built for boost, so the compression is a little lower. We did mill the heads when we had them off to try to help bump that up, but it's not really set up for NA. It does have a normally aspirated cam in it, but it's got dish pistons. So, and again, I talked about that cold air that was on it. And it's not so much the cold air, but it's just the G8s. This stock mass airflow sensor is small. It's like I don't even know if it's 3.5 inches on the inside. So we'll take a look at the data log, but what ends up happening with these is you get a restriction. Even though you got this nice element, you got a bigger tube, this is the restriction. So when you put more cubic inches on it, it makes it even worse. So, and you can see that in the data log here. So we'll take a look at that. So you can see I have it was liking it lean. I had, some good timing in it, 26, 27. Air fuel out here at 0.8, 0.88, 0.87, 0.88, and so I got the air fuel pretty smooth out here. A little bit wavy down in here, but you can see the mass airflow sensor again. Those older hot wire MAFs are the non-blade style. They just don't work as good as the blade style, and these cars unfortunately just didn't get those blade MAFs yet. They didn't come out with those until later on the 5th gen Camaros. So when you have cams in them, they kind of read funky, and sometimes you get a little bit of up and down with the air fuel ratio, but this is pretty good. I mean, on E85 LS, normally aspirated LS setups like this are the difference between like 12.3, 12.4 to 1. I'll talk gas air fuel ratio scale. I know tuners will cringe at that, but everybody else is familiar with that. So on a gasoline scale, they're tolerant between 12.3 and 12.9. They'll make the same power on E85. So, but again, I read in lambda. So when I say, you know, here's 0.85, here's 0.83, it's going to make the same. I mean, 0.83 is like low 12s, 0.88 is high 12s on a gas scale. So since everybody's familiar with gasoline scales of air fuel ratio. So yeah, I'm totally happy with this, with the way this looks, for how kind of jagged we are on this mass airflow, this kind of lavender line here. So, but what I wanted to talk about is the map sensor. So you can see when I hit the throttle, so right now with the key on, engine off, we're seeing about 98 kPa. So you can see when I hit the throttle at 2400 RPM there, it's at 97. So there's a tiny little bit, 1 kPa of restriction. The maps, I'll preface this statement with the manifold air pressure sensor will, no matter what, no matter how free-flowing of an intake tube and intake manifold you have, they will always drop some because of velocity. Moving air has lower pressure than non-moving air. That's how like an airplane wing works. The air moving over the top of the wing on the curved surface has a lower pressure, which creates lift, which actually draws the airplane up. That's how airplane wings work. Faster moving air has lower pressure. So inside an intake manifold where you have air moving across where the map sensor is bolted into, is reading and referencing, when the air has velocity, it's gonna drop. So you're gonna get some drop on your map sensor no matter what intake manifold you have. If there's air moving through the intake manifold, there's gonna be a pressure drop. But that being said, normally it's about 3 kPa in an LS manifold on something like this. Now maybe if you had some other custom intake, but like readily stock intakes and like off-the-shelf intakes, there's always about, when you have the freest flowing tube or just like an open throttle body, you'll see about a 3 kPa drop. So usually they'll drop to like 96, 95, something like that. But this one is dropping, you can see how far it drops. 93. I thought I even saw 92 at the top. There's 92. So that is telling us that there is a restriction, and I guarantee you it's the mass airflow sensor. So this car would benefit from like a bigger intake tube and a blade style, like LS3 style MAF, like a 2010 Camaro, or you know, that Gen 4 mass airflow sensor. But he's thinking about doing a supercharger anyway, and so I don't think it's really worth chasing. Now if you wanted to stay normally aspirated, we could probably come up with something. I don't know that the companies that made the over the radiator intakes on these things make them anymore. I don't know if those still exist, but that would certainly help this car if it was staying NA. I guarantee you we'd pick up another 10 or 15 wheel with a different intake on it. With ridding ourselves, there's 92.1, you can see. So that's dropping quite a bit. That's a pretty serious restriction right there. And again, the stock mass air, that small little mass airflow sensor on this 408 cubic inch motor, it's just not enough. And there's a couple other things going against this car too. It's got a 2.5 inch exhaust, which is too small it's technically too small for a 408. It's got the stock mufflers on it, which on these G8s, they're not a dual mode muffler. So they're like a chamber. They got all sorts of stuff going in. They're real quiet. Those are a restriction on this car. So there's a lot of little stuff. I hate adding up Ricer math, but in these applications where I know for a fact when we change stuff out, we see gains. If you really were after an NA setup on a 408, yeah, there's gains to be had elsewhere on this car. So compression ratio is one. You know, again, we're probably right about 10 to 1. Obviously, you want to be closer. Like with this is a BTR stage 3 cam, I believe. You want to be closer to 11 to 1 on the 85, more than 11 to 1. So it's a lot of little stuff on this where we could pick up power. But otherwise, for what we got here, I'm happy with this. We knew going in that it would probably, I was guessing about 450 because I think he said it made, I can't remember if we said it made 430 before, something like that. And I told them we're not going to make a whole lot more because the stock, you know, we're dropping compression and we're not really adding anything else to support the bigger cubic inch. So, but you know, real nice torque curve. It's got a real nice flat torque curve from 3, you know, where the stall converter comes in, you know, right in here. It's real nice and flat. So yeah, I'm happy with this. Curve looks nice. Another thing you can see that's indicative of a restriction is how early it's peaking. I mean, this thing's peaking at, you know, that run there, 5,600. So right in here, it's kind of holding flat to 59, and then it's just, you know, it just starts to drop. So normally these cars with cams, when they're stock displacement and higher compression, they'll peak out 63 and then just kind of carry power all the way to 7. But I didn't even bother taking it to 7 because it would be down, you know, way down here. So I'm going to set this car up right now to shift like out here somewhere. So their shift recovery is here. So it kind of runs like, you know, about 65 to, you know, 52, 5 to 52. I feel like that's about where it needs to be. That kind of gives us the, basically what you're trying to achieve on a shift recovery is you want your, at least this is how I do it, you want your power to be equal where it shifts and then where it recovers on the shift. So, you know, when you have a power curve like this, so you want it to lay over to about where it's going to recover to. So when we have it shifted about 66, it's going to come back to about 5 on the 1-2 shift, maybe 49. The 2-3, it'll probably be right about 5 or 51, and then the 3-4 will be about 52. So that's where I'm going to set the shifts up. That's why I always, before I do final transmission tuning, I always have it on the dyno first, so I can look at the power curve, and then we can figure on, depending on what transmission it's got, whether it's a 6, 8, 10 speed or a manual. I know I've done enough of them all where I know exactly where the shift recoveries are, and I have data logs, all that stuff, and I can go back and reference stuff, and I know exactly where all those different transmissions, when you shift the gear, where it recovers to. That determines how fast the car is going to accelerate. So even though this has a converter in it, it's still going to drop quite a bit. You know, these Circle Ds they couple really nicely at the top. They're really efficient. So so they do have a little bit of drop on the shift recovery, but when you have a nice power curve like that, it's fine. So enough nerding out and talking tech. Thanks for watching, guys. That'll do it for this one. And we'll get this one off the rack here. And I'll probably do some final drivability probably next week. It's Friday night. It's like 7:30, and I'm ready to go home. I'm going to the drag strip tomorrow morning to help another customer with another G8 that is a bracket racer. So I got to get up early and be at the track. So I'm going to finish this one up on Monday. So thanks for watching. Check back for more videos, and we'll talk to you guys later.